pleasure to be with you. I particularly enjoy the strands of connection. I mean, I am here, and I think our lives are connected by a tapestry that is absolutely inexplicable and maybe only understandable in retrospect, but I so enjoy meeting people in this serendipitous way. What are the chances that you and I would meet? And yet here we are. What are the chances that we can contribute to each other? Our lives would never have intersected. But yet there's this amazing confluence of factors, starting with one woman who heard me speak in White Rock. And about 5 years later, here I am in front of you. So it's a joy and a privilege to be with you. I want to talk to you about something that I believe we can all absolutely relate to. I don't think there is a life lived that won't be one that can be seen on what I'm about to say. So let me just start with my declared topic, right? Which is choices, growth, and inner freedom in the second half of life. And I'm just going to start with the quote because that's why we're here. This is what you're expecting. We cannot live the afternoon of life. And most of us are in the afternoon. In fact, I'm going to speak in a moment that the afternoon is not chronological. The second half of life for some of us can begin at 21. I'll speak to that in a moment. We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening. And what in morning was true will at evening have become a lie. And I'll just read the first paragraph. Most people in our society are extremely ill-equipped to deal with the psychological issues, challenges, and rich potential inherent in the second half of life. The so-called midlife crisis, and who can't relate to that, is both necessary and inevitable. This is because what is required to experience deep personal meaning, fulfillment, and happiness in the second half of life is nearly the mirror opposite of that which is asked of its first half. Okay? So let me go into that in this next half hour or so. So again, to begin, the second half of life isn't about hitting so-called middle age. I've always liked that term because middle age, I'm in middle age. Covers a lot of ground, right? It's not chronological. The second half of life begins when the first half of life has taken you about as far as it can. Where your old patterns, your old thought system, sometimes your old lifestyle, your old relationships have taken you about as far as they can. And they cannot take you any further. So the second half of life begins when we hit a place on the road of life where all that we know ourselves to be can't take us any further. So let me just go to the board and show this to you in a different way to start. I'm going to call this arc our anticipated life. The life that we thought was ahead of us when we were 16 years old or 18 years old or 21 years old. The only life that we could imagine ourselves in, I'm going to call our anticipated life, Okay? Now, see if we can all relate to this. Our anticipated life didn't make it. Our anticipated life fell apart at some point in a gazillion pieces. You know, I don't know if this quote is actually John Lennon's, but it's attributed to him, that life is that which happens while we're busy making other plans. Or another one, the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. Right? So what we have to deal with is this. Now this I'm going to call my actual life. My actual life. And between the anticipated life and the actual life is the most challenging, frightening, upsetting, unnerving, liberating, freeing, exciting possibility that is inherent in our entire experience of life. And I'm just going to call it the gap. Okay? Most of us spend our lives desperately trying to avoid the gap. Because we know that the gap is that place between the old, which is outlived and cannot be returned to, and the new, which is not yet formed and not yet anything that's developed enough for us to stand on. The courage of inner work, often precipitated by life events, because what are typical gaps? An unanticipated divorce, including the pain that often is part of that. The sickness of a child, right? The dismissal or a relinquishment of a job, the unanticipated car accident. Basically, all of life's setbacks, all of life's so-called failures, all of those times, and I'll just call these unnatural losses, throw us from the first half of life. Now, let me just finish up the diagram, and then I'll explain. The possibility, and ultimately for many of us the inevitability, is we're going to have to reinvent ourselves. A new life. And the new life will, by definition, because of the fall of the first, not be like the old one. It can't be. So the opportunity here is all kinds of new directions. However, the crossing over is what I want to talk about, because that's, again, inevitable, and that's where our mettle is tested, and that's where we have to shift from the old thought system to a new thought system, and that is never easy. So let me go into some detail now. In the first half of life, just where do we all start? We all start as babies. We all start as children. We all start knowing and experiencing ourselves to be absolutely defenseless, vulnerable, impressionable, and dependent on those around us for our very survival. Inherent in the child's consciousness is these two towering giants named Mom and Dad have given me life, and I am utterly and completely dependent on them for everything. They aren't people, if you remember. They're worlds. They're everything. So out of that experience that is just part of the human journey, we define ourselves in relation to all that we see around us. And we have to get from the world around us everything we need. We have to find a way to belong to the world around us. The world around us becomes our God in a very real way, in the sense that we find our security, we find our identity, we find an experience of feeling even temporarily safe, loved, valued, known by the world, other human beings. So the first half of life is inevitably a social script. We look in the direction our eyeballs are pointing for everything that we need. And when we don't get it, as a child, our world is devastated. That world, where we're defined by we need something from our parents in order to exist. We see ourselves in the mirror of a peer group, or of a society, or a little later on of a romantic partner. All of that I am going to call the horizontal. We are looking out there to the world to give us everything we need. It's inevitable. Further to which, in order to succeed and make it in the world, even to just, live and breathe and pay our rent and have food to eat, we acquire things from the world. That's what the first half of life is all about. It's about the deliberate acquisition of things that we believe and accurately at that time know that we need. What are they? I acquire education. I acquire material possessions. Perhaps I acquire property. I acquire status. I acquire reputation. I acquire power. But I'm getting it all in relation to the horizontal, in relation to the world, right? The world, in many ways, becomes the substitution for my mother and my father. I need it to show me who I am. I need it to give me the safety and security that I seek. All of that is the first half of life. It's inevitable. Okay. The way to sum up the horizontal is this is one realm, although for many lives it's the only realm from cradle to grave, by which I feel good about myself, by which I feel secure and safe, by which I feel valued and loved and known. Except there's one thing about the horizontal you might have noticed. It's always changeable. Always changeable. If I'm relying on your approval of me, which is one example of the horizontal, I put myself on a roller coaster, and I am on a roller coaster ride for the rest of my life. Because other people are changeable, right? If I rely on a romantic partner to give me my definition of myself, I am on that same roller coaster, because who can't relate to this, She loves me. She loves me not. He loves me. He loves me not. Right? The economy is going well. No, it isn't. The stock market is... No, it isn't. The weather is... No, it isn't. Hooking ourselves to the horizontal is a wild ride. And at best, even when you get what you're looking for, the next thought in the egoic mind, after you get what you're looking for, is I could lose this. Right? I haven't interviewed any Stanley Cup champions, but I have to believe that 4 days after they celebrate the Stanley Cup, their egoic mind comes back in and says, but what about next year? That is how enslaved we are if our entire sense of self is determined by the horizontal. Now, what I'm again saying is, that's where we all start. Now, the opportunity that the gap presents, and it's how many of us have actually wanted and welcomed the difference between the anticipated life and the actual life? Like none, right? Every single person I work with is in the gap. Because beyond their control, beyond their self-determination, they are catapulted into the possibility of entering the second half of life. Now, many clients, and I've been at this craft or art for 31 years, are happy to just put themselves back on the old horse and ride off in the same direction that they came from, which is absolutely their right to do. But some people, maybe because of the depth or extent of the pain and the fall, or maybe because of a dawning awareness that, hold it, there are built-in limitations to the old way that I lived, even when I succeeded, enter and stay long enough in the gap. Now, those are courageous souls, because it's very much like leaving old Madrid, if you were Christopher Columbus, and going somewhere that you're told exists or might exist, called America. But when you're a third of the way into the Atlantic, you don't see old Madrid, and you sure don't see the outlines of a new continent. And our courage and our guidance in the gap is absolutely essential to make the transition to a new way of being. Now, let me speak about the second transition that many of us resist. The second place where we can find our safety and security, feeling loved, safe, valued, and known, is in our relationship with ourself. One that's often called by the old thought system self-centered or selfish. But in fact, if I do not find within everything I am looking for, I am enslaved by the without, right? There's an old adage that I like very much. If you don't go within, you go without. Now there's a double entendre there. If you don't go within, there's only one other game in town. It's back to the horizontal, right? Please like me. I need to be successful. I have to be a good person. All of that is still the old horizontal in action. But the beginning of the first transition is from the horizontal to the internal. Can I find in myself, when I am alone, and that's where I gave you this article on the difference between loneliness and solitude. Can I find what I need and everything I'm looking for in my relationship with myself. Now, very few human beings take on that transition. It's kind of like, if I'm alone on a desert island, will I find in the internal, and I'm going to go to one more realm in a few minutes, will I find in the vertical everything that I need? And how do I engage in a process that transitions me from my utter and complete dependency on the horizontal to becoming much more connected to myself, my relationship with myself? Some author should have used that title. So the second half of life, and I work with clients, I'm working with one client now who's in his 20s. He is forced to enter the second half of his life, right? I'm working with people, however, or seeing people, hearing about people who never enter the second half of their life in their 80s. They hold on as long as they can from cradle to grave. It's very much an individual, personal process. Whereas the first half of life is all about that social script, and at its worst, it's, I'm going to dance for you. I need you so badly to like me. I need you so badly to agree with me. I need you so badly to approve that I am going to constantly dance for you so that I get that little bit of temporary acceptance, right, and affirmation. But again, the more I go to the horizontal, the more I go to the horizontal. The second half of life moves from a social script to a spiritual script. And in the internal, now we're in the middle here, the middle passage, I realize that even when I find all that I'm looking for in the horizontal, you know, those rare moments where, you know, she likes me and it's lasted for 2 solid weeks now, right? So even when I find cheese, right, I realize I'm still in a maze. Even my best hours of my best days in the maze, and that's when I find cheese, I chew it, I swallow it, and I return to the maze. For those of you that have seen the movie The Matrix, this is very similar to The Matrix, hauntingly similar. Those people say, you know what? There has to be something more than cheese. I have no idea what it is.
Nothing's better than cheese.
Yeah, say cheese. There has to be something more than cheese. And I sure as heck hope that there's something more than the maze. That is the beginning. The depth of that pain, the depth of that inquiry, the depth of that passion is the spiritual quest. And it's way beyond what we read or what we know or what we think or what we say. It's for those individuals whose lives are on the line in finding America. Because they're fully aware that they're dead in old Madrid. So the Columbus inside us may spend the rest of our lives in old Madrid. But there may come a point where you say to yourself, or are catapulted into a situation where you can't help but say to yourself, I would rather die in the mid-Atlantic searching for America than be dead in old Madrid. If you mean what you say and you say what you mean in that statement, you are ready to move spirituality to the deepest, most experiential core of your being. And it's no longer something that's a set of ideas. It's no longer something that someone else tells you about. It's no longer someone that inspires you. It is you putting one foot ahead of the other into and through the gap. and I have the honor and privilege of being an escort. In fact, I may be called a psychotherapist, but I'm really an emotional midwife. That's really what I am, because I can see the head of this new creation, of this new being, of this new set of possibilities before the actual person delivering. And my job, like a doula or a midwife, is to be there at every single stage of that birthing process, in the transition from the horizontal to the internal. So the internal, this second transition that many of us avoid, is all about personal authority. What does personal authority mean? Personal authority means that I trust myself, my feelings, my guides, my truths, more than I trust anything or anyone in the horizontal. It's an incredible human achievement for those intrepid journeyers that go there. What does it mean? Stated most simply, it means to find what is true, most true for oneself, and live it in the world. To find what is most true for oneself and live it in the world. To find out, you could say, what wishes to come through us. It doesn't come from us. What wishes to come through us. Another way of saying it much more simply is, am I living the most authentic life possible? Am I living in a way that is true to my deepest self or not? That is the question, moving from the horizontal to the internal. Who am I? Who am I really? Not what I was told, not the definitions of self that I absorbed from the horizontal. Who am I really? Who am I behind the roles I have played and the expectations I have met? What is the nature of life and death? What does my soul or authentic self ask me to be in this lifetime? Am I living, again, in a way that is true to my deepest self or not? So where the first half of life, the horizontal, is looking to the world for my reflection, the second transition is looking to my truths for my own reflection. In that way we start to see, because I've escorted many, many births, I am an experienced doula. We lack a deep sense of permission to live our own lives. At a deeper, quiet, and often unconscious part of ourselves, we are living the life that Daddy wanted for us. Or we are living the life that Mummy wanted for us. Or certainly we are living the life that society says is best for us. We lack and don't even ask the questions. This is my life. What do I choose? And the work that lies ahead, which we'll be doing at 1:15 today, is how do I extricate myself from that incredible conditioning that by default has me perhaps living someone else's life, but not my own. Or never even asking the question, what is my life about? What is my passion? What am I here to give? Which may or may not at all be what Daddy or Mummy did with theirs or wanted for you. Another way to say that is, in this journey we realize, and it's painful and it's sweet, that we've lived in shoes that are way too small for ourselves. We've always adjusted or adapted to the shoe size. And part of the terror and part of the joy of transitioning to the internal is you kick those shoes off. But what's unavoidable? The gap. Not only do you feel shoeless, you feel naked, directionless, disorganized. It appears to your egoic consciousness that your life is falling apart and that you have failed, that you didn't have what it took to be in that marriage and that's why it ended. You have to battle, although that's not the best word, for that which rises up inside you to tell you that you are the one that should return to your old shoe size. Something inside us, here's a beautiful quote, something is living us more than we are living it. As a child, you knew this. As an adult, you have to remember it. I'll talk about this after lunch. You came as close to your original design, your original vision for your life, your original passion when you were a child. Something spoke to you then because the egoic consciousness hadn't completely overtaken you. The challenge of moving to the internal is remembering the child and what the child was saying this lifetime is about, what the child was saying holds most value. And let me just give you one personal example. I was telling Rena this on the way in. I wanted to be a bus driver. 8 years old, I loved what I saw bus drivers do. And I had a bike, and in my mind, I turned my bike into a bus. And I would go down the back alley, this is all, of course, in my mind, and I'd make stops. And I loved people entering my bus. And I loved being, in that way, responsible for their safety, right? And here, listen to this, and for transporting them from A to B. Okay, so I am a bus driver. That is exactly what I am doing, right? And loving it just as much 31 years on as I did on my bike, saying, come on to my bus, where do you want to go? And I will take you there. Now, I don't say that to my clients. I say, right, I will watch you and support you going there. That's just an example, right? How the vision of that bus driver, and as you can see, the emotional components of that, right? And the spiritual components of that turned out to be exactly what I am doing as a psychotherapist and a teacher and guide for others. So, again, in this middle passage to the internal, we want to find out, and the only way to find out is to let go of our old beliefs, our old thought system, and even our old self-definitions. Again, many of them are already taken away from us anyway in the gap. So why don't we just jump further and see how far we can go? So let me just end this middle section by saying, now we move into not involuntary losses, but the second half of life chronologically is about inevitable and natural loss. In fact, seen from the perspective of the first half of life, the second half of life is a slow horror show. I mean, we don't stop long enough to acknowledge that. We lose friends, right? Many people that we thought would be with us for a lifetime, where we just clicked like 2 peas in a pod at 18. We don't have anything to say to in this middle passage. Right? We don't add to their lives. We don't feel they add to our lives. We lose friends. We lose mates. Again, in the anticipated life, when I said I do, I thought it meant it. I lose mates. I lose children. They must leave me. That is natural. That is developmental. That is inherent in the parent-child relationship. I want them to leave me. I lose social status. Try the moment you retire. How things change. I lose conventional attractiveness. Look at this. One after another after another. I lose sexual robustness. Eventually, I'm going to lose my body and life itself. The second half of life is about the complete and utter and hopefully gracious and empowered relinquishment of everything we attained in the first half of life. And that's what makes these gaps so difficult. That's what makes retirement so difficult. That's what makes reinventing ourselves so difficult. Is you can avoid the unnatural losses as best you can by staying in the maze. But life is set up, or perhaps God has set it up, so that you cannot, well, you can, but the invitation in the second half of life is to enter the world of the invisible, is to enter the world that is private and personal and internal, is to enter the world that cannot be seen by our biological eyes, can never be measured, right, can never be validated, therefore science will never corroborate it, and yet somehow it suggests itself to me as that which is more real than anything my eyes have ever lit upon in my entire lifetime. So, that is the beginning, and that's where this article comes in. Those people who have successfully made the transition into the internal have converted what appears to be fear and insecurity and loneliness to the egoic mind into solitude and the experience that everything I need is within. Again, quite the challenge, quite the inner work to accomplish. Now let me go to the third and final transition. There's one more realm in which I can feel safe, valued, loved, and known. And I call it the vertical. It's the most non-religious, non-sectarian term I can come up with for the spiritual. For that which, again, I can never see with my biological eyes, but it suggests itself to me in every moment of my waking life. To move from the internal to the vertical, yet another huge transition for those intrepid souls that choose to take it experientially. Because in many ways you have to give up this me you think you are over and over and over again in order to create the space for God to inhabit. Right? God can't come in if you are nothing but the me in your storyline. And most of us spend our lives, that's who we are. I'm going to give you my story, the me story. The third stage is about surrendering everything that you've achieved in both the internal and the horizontal. Because you can't cross the threshold with any of that stuff. Simply put, the vertical is about self-surrender. And again, to the egoic mind, I might as well be inviting you to your own death. And again, I'm not talking about knowing this stuff intellectually, reading about this stuff, hearing about this stuff from an inspired speaker. I'm talking about those people that jump. I'm talking about those souls that want to not believe in God or, trust maybe that there is one, but experience To do that is the transition into the vertical. The question as you move from the internal to the vertical, and I'm going to quote Jung here, am I related to something infinite or not? That is the telling question of my life. If I understand and feel that here in this life I already have a link with the infinite, desires and attitudes change. In the final analysis, we count for something only because of the essential we embody. And if we do not embody that, life is wasted. So how do we get through the losses? Now, what I'm calling the natural losses of the second half of life. Midlife crisis is those souls who are totally ill-equipped for that, because they only know how to operate in the horizontal. And yet, to make the passage into the most safe, fulfilling, and satisfying second half of life is the mirror opposite of everything that got us through the first half. And so when a businessman comes in and says, I don't know what to do with myself, right? Or a woman comes in and says, now that my children have left, ... right? That is, again, the invitation to the gap. So, in the horizontal, I am looking to the world for my reflection. It's always changeable. It's always impermanent. Even if you like me today, you might not like me tomorrow. Maybe you don't even like me today. The internal, as I tell my clients, the only person you're going to wake up with the rest of your life, guaranteed. And the vertical is, the internal is infused. And I find everything that the first half of my life I found in the horizontal, I find in the vertical. To get there experientially is what I call the work of love. It's what I call inner work. It's what those of you that want to take a look at this will just start at 1:15 today. Or pick up where you've left off, so that perhaps as this midwife I can guide you somewhere you haven't been able to go by yourself. But the final act in life is looking to God for my reflection. Now that doesn't mean you don't like and love people. I happen to like and love people. And I'll sing Barbara Streisand's a song loud and clear. People who need people are the luckiest people in this world. But if you put all your eggs in that basket, watch out. Watch out. If you put all your eggs in the internal, though freeing beyond belief from being enslaved by the horizontal, but if you have all three humming, if you have that connection experientially, vertically, if you have that connection inside yourself, to thine own self be true, and it must follow the day, the night, thou canst be false to no one, then actually you're empowered to return to the horizontal, but you don't need anything back from it. The freedom, even if it's just temporary, I don't need anything back from you. I don't need money, I don't need affirmation, I don't need recognition, I don't need sex, I don't need, is how incredibly freeing the experiential path to the internal and the vertical can allow. So let me just end. Each one of these transitions, again, from the default of the horizontal to the internal, from the internal to the vertical, unavoidably and inevitably require that you confront fear, that you confront loneliness, that you confront insecurity, that it feels like you are falling apart in a gazillion pieces. And on some level you are. However, what is falling in a gazillion pieces is in fact the phoenix rising. They're one and the same. It is in fact, if you have the support, if you have the courage, and if for whatever reason you don't want to return to the maze, then you are ready to live and breathe the vertical, the internal, and the horizontal. So the way I like to put it to people that are just kind of saying, well, hold it. I don't want to lose that connection to if I go internally, or if I go vertically. I just tell them the horizontal is the gravy. The horizontal is the cherry on top. You don't have to lose that. But it's never, ever going to give you what the internal and the vertical do. And some people say, thank you very much for sharing, Joel. I think I'll choose another psychotherapist. Which is their perfect right. And some people say, and this often is the case, it just keeps happening. The patterns just keep repeating themselves. You know, sometimes when we hit our 30s or 40s or 50s, it's like, the patterns are way bigger than the people. The patterns are way bigger than geography. The patterns are way bigger than success in the marketplace. The patterns just keep repeating themselves, so I might as well tackle them, because wherever I go, there they are. So let me end with just these quotes. One from Nietzsche. Nietzsche, the philosopher, perhaps the most brilliant, incisive spokesperson for the internal. When we are alone and quiet, we are afraid that something will be whispered in our ear. And we so hate the silence and drug ourselves with social life. 150 years ahead of Facebook. And two final quotes. Our souls long for transcendence, for meaning, for connection. This is who we most deeply are. When that need is intimidated by fear itself, that's the theme of the workshop coming up. When that need is intimidated by fear itself, diverted by cultural idols, I want you to like me. I want to be nothing but successful. Something terrible happens to our souls. When we learn, this is inner work right here. I imagine many people are going to run for the exit. When we learn to face our fear, open to the universe without defense, and follow what beckons, we will find our true spiritual path. And lastly, and this is, I have tremendous respect for people that engage in this last quote. Making choices without the support of others may be intimidating. But since We are here to carry out the soul's agenda rather than that of our family, our neighbors, our peer group, even our society. Doesn't it make sense to treasure personal authority over a fearful, childhood-based defense system that operate behind the choices of our lives? Thank you very much for listening.